We were immigrants, and we had to make a living. You took any job you could get.
I thought it was just a family story.
He was there 25 years old, just 25 years old.
Then we found the diary, the photos, everything.
He said to try to persuade Kilo that it was in his own interest to have Tess made.
I actually do recall my brother saying he was not looking forward to going back down in that hole.
She said, why don't you just call it sick? It's too dangerous, don't go.
If something happens, you have John. Those are the last words that I remember my dad saying.
He was down below somewhere when the whole thing collapsed.
He was halfway down the hole, and he had reinforcement bar through his chest.
Our family was the only ones that could have an open coffin.
The guy told her to get a chair and sit down.
He kept saying, it was all my fault, it was all my fault.
That was the last time that I saw him.
Hi everybody, welcome to our live stream Q&A and Happy Canada Day. My name is Eric Philpott. I'm the writer and director on Dresden 1957. And in this session, we'll talk a bit about the story of the Dresden tragedy. We'll talk about the process of turning this into a film. And we'll also meet John Hovius, who appears in the film. John's father and oldest brother died in the tragedy. By letting this event disappear from our public memory, we have created an illusion that this event was somehow, while sad, somehow maybe not important. And nothing could be further from the truth. This was a major event when it happened. It was the largest workplace accident in Ontario's history. It had a tremendous impact on society at the time. It was in the newspapers across the country, in Dutch newspapers. There are hundreds upon hundreds of articles about this from that time. Also, this event sits at an important intersection in our history. This is the time when Ontario's modern infrastructure was being built. The world that we live in today was being built at that time. This is also an immigrant story, and this is a nation of immigrants. And so this is also one of the elements that comes into the story of Dresden 1957. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the whole issue of workplace and workers' safety. And if we cannot even remember stories like this, how will we ever become a society that will remember or honor individual tragedies whenever a worker is killed or disabled on the job? So I think I'm going to start off by just giving you a quick recap of where we're at in our crowdfunding. So if we can pull up the slides. Right now we are hitting, actually that's not the slide, sorry, I'll move it. 1 second. Right now, if you look on the Seed and Spark screen, you'll see that we're at 74%, which is fantastic after 3 weeks of crowdfunding. That's an incredible result. And you see that the bar is red. That indicates that we have not yet got the green light. Everybody who's contributed has made a pledge. Once the funding hits 80% of our goal, the pledges are, at that point, the pledges will be collected at the end of the crowdfunding session. So we're still at 74% right now, which is fantastic. But when we hit 80, then the project gets a green light. And of course, we want to get to our goal and actually past our goal if we can. So if we look at this one, this is on the dashboard inside. When I look in the Seed and Spark dashboard, you can see the blue line represents our progress in our crowdfunder, and the dotted line represents the average for other crowdfunding projects. So you can see we started out of the gate way above the, or well above the average for crowdfunding. And we've now, and this is predictable, kind of dipped down into sort of average territory. So now we're entering the last 9 days of the campaign. You know, it's really important now that we really kind of keep moving that forward. I'll talk about that a little bit at the end of this session when we talk actually about the whole, how do we make a film like this? So moving on, we can, yeah, we don't need the slides, sorry, yeah. Okay, thank you. So moving on, I just want to say a little, like, remind you, if you haven't heard it before, like, how did I even know about this story? This is I'm making the point, an entirely forgotten event in Ontario's history. Well, I know about it because of a strange family connection. A few years ago, I asked my mother about, what did Dad do when he was in Canada before he met you? My parents met in Holland when my dad was doing a graduate program for engineering. So I asked her, what did he do? And my father died in '94, so he can't tell me. And my mother told me this story, that he'd been the site engineer for a waterworks construction project in Dresden, Ontario. He had some concerns about the safety of this site. He talked to the contractor. They didn't, unfortunately, do anything about it. There was a cave-in, 6 men were killed. That's the story I heard. And of course, I was thinking, that sounds pretty serious. And I looked on the internet and I found absolutely nothing. But then I don't know, my parents aren't people who would not be truthful about this, but it seemed like maybe some details were missing or something like that. Anyway, fast forward a few years until about 2020, and my mother made a pretty important discovery. She was going through my father's papers and she found there his Dresden diary, drawings and letters, and all of a sudden it was clear this happened, and it happened exactly the way my mom had described it. And here we had this incredible, detailed backstory of what had happened leading up to the cave-in. So if we can, do I activate that? Yeah, there you go. So I just want to show you what this looks like. This is the first page inside the diary. You see RE, that means resident engineer. This was a waterworks construction. My dad's engineering company in Toronto had designed the waterworks and the pumping station. And then the engineering firm had done the bidding and hired Keeler Construction to do as the contractor. And then they send a junior engineer who will live in Dresden during the week and will kind of oversee not the details of construction, but make sure that the project is built according to the plans. So that was my dad's job on this. So here you see his resident engineer title page in his beautiful green fountain pen ink, and the name of his company and the address of his company. That company still exists, by the way, slightly different name. And then you see here, like, first page, first day, he's in Dresden, the job hasn't started, and already on but that night he goes and looks at the site. Typical of my father, he likes to sort of familiarize himself with the place where this job is happening. So he did a tour with Curly King, the Dresden Utilities Commission manager. Curly King took him to the site, and he looked at there, and he wrote already in his diary, noted that the bank of the site for the low-lift pump station is very steep. We must keep a record of soil excavation to test stability if it seems necessary. That means that on the very first night, before they've even started, my father is aware of the risk that this is not necessarily going to be an entirely stable place to be digging a deep hole. Then you see the next day, and here you already see the main characters in the story. He lists the people in the meeting: Alvin Keeler, the contractor; Dick Reichson, whose real name was Dirk Reichson, who was the foreman; Curly King, and so on. And above that is in his first paragraph, he says, 5 men, all of Dutch origin, erected a hut on the lot adjacent to the low-lift pump station. And there in his diary is the moment where the 5 of the workers, plus the foreman, the men who will die in this story, they make their first appearance. It's not just the diary, which does, of course, give day by day exactly what's happening. It's also photos. And after the accident or the tragedy, my father put the photos in order and listed them with, the date and, what the photo shows. And he actually documented that. You can actually line up the photos with the diary, and you've got a very clear record of everything. Also, his letters were preserved. Here's the letter he sent to the contractor on the 12th of August. And here you see this pretty important sentence or paragraph: concerning the poor soil conditions of the low-lift pumping station, under the terms of the contract, you will note that it is the contractor's responsibility to satisfy himself that the soil conditions are suitable, and as you know, we are not too happy with the soft clay that has been encountered. So here you can sort of see this is all documented. It's not just a family story. This really all happened and in detail. And finally, in his photo album, I just want to show this. This is the last known photograph of the men, 5 of the men. So the 6 men who died were these 5 in this photograph, plus Dirk Reichsen, the contractor. So yeah, that's a little bit of the background there. But this is, of course, not just the story of an accident that shouldn't have happened and a story that shouldn't have been forgotten. This is also very much an immigrant story. And I would like to introduce John Hovius now and welcome John. Let's see if we can get him on the screen here. And there's John. Welcome, John. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Eric.
Okay?
Yes, thank you, Eric.
All right. So John is a character in the film, and John's father, Enna, and his oldest brother, Wilfred, or Wybrandt, both died, sadly, in this tragedy. But the whole sort of larger context of this is, in fact, that immigrant story. So John, can you share a little bit, like, what was your life in Holland, and why did you come to Canada, and what was it like when you first came to Canada?
Yes, well, in Holland, our family was probably middle class in the sense that we had no need for money. Dad worked. Dad worked with a partner, and he would take on jobs at various farms. For example, constructing a pipe system to alleviate the water problem in a field. And he also had ability to inspect potatoes in the summer, and if there were diseased potatoes, he would eliminate the diseased potatoes. He would walk through the potato field row by row. And I, as a child, was with him on occasion. He also helped to clean ditches so that they would not get clogged by weeds to prevent the flow of water.
So sorry to cut in, but in short, your father had, a lot of different or multiple jobs. He had a decent income. Why on earth would he or anyone leave Holland if they had a decent life there?
Well, he had a dairy cows, about 10, I think, at the time. And he liked cattle. He wanted a dairy farm. But he also told even me at that age that he would never be able to buy a farm in Holland because the price was too high. And also he just didn't see the ability to do so. And he heard, of course, about immigration. So that led him to think about immigrating to Canada. And the discussion started as early as 1950 between my parents, because my mother was more hesitant than my father. I think she felt that there would be some hardship in immigrating, and she was quite satisfied, except for her living conditions. The house was too small for 9 people, and she was hoping for a better house. She was hoping, and her doctor told her that her rheumatism would probably be less severe if she came to Canada because of the dry air in Canada versus the dry air in Holland. So those were the reasons, basically, why they wanted to emigrate. And eventually, in 1953, they came together and decided that they would take that leap.
So I know there's a lot of stories about actually the crossing the ocean, which will all be in the film, the whole adventure of coming here, but maybe just fast forwarding to what life was actually like when you arrived. Can you share a little bit about that? So you're leaving a fairly stable life, and maybe the house is too small, but then coming to Canada, what was life like in Canada in those first years?
Life was like okay in the first summer that we were here. My father worked and was employed by a farmer, and he worked for the farmer until about October, when the farmer terminated his employment. And as a result, the employment included a house and also milk from the cows. When that was terminated, he had to find a place that he could rent. And one of the problems from leaving Holland was that there was restrictions on the currency movement, and you could only take the equivalent of $500 worth of money out of Holland at the time. And as a result of that, he only had $500 when he came to Canada. And when he bought the first car here in Canada, which he needed for employment, he, of course, had no money left except a little bit that they had saved up with the assistance of my brother who had worked that summer. And as a result, we were very poor. People would actually bring us groceries. They'd leave the groceries on our porch. They would bring us used clothes. They would bring us everything that they could possibly imagine because they knew we were in trouble.
John, there's a question actually from Francis, and by the way, hi Francis, thank you for joining us, Francis Crossman. He's asking, how were the Dutch treated, the Dutch immigrants treated? And I guess there's various answers to that, but what would you say?
Well, I would say generally in Eastern Ontario, there had not been many Dutch immigrants, and it was hard to mix because even with the kids, because I didn't speak a word of English, and I had to learn English, as did my siblings, of course. And that process was at first kind of difficult to communicate with people. But I found that the treatment generally was, I don't think they understood us. And at first we didn't understand them. I think that's a bit of the truth there. And we stuck to the Dutch immigrants, and that's it.
You stuck together, you mean, as a community? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, I'm going to move us ahead. We're going to come back to John in a moment with a bit more, with other questions. But I want to share a little bit about the kind of the detective work of, how we, excuse me, I'm jumping ahead. I actually want to share who the families were in this film who were affected by this. So if we start here, the slides are out of order. I apologize. I'll just skip. This here shows you the men who died. So in the top left corner, you can see Wilfred Hovius. That's John's older brother, and he was 19 years old when he died. Next to him is Dirk Reichson, the foreman, who was 37 when he died. And then the top right is Anna Hovius, that's John's father, who was only 39 when he died. In the lower row, you can see Jan Bramer, who was 43, and Jan Oldwaning, who was 45, and then the oldest of the group was Hendrik Drent, who was 58. Let me just see if the slides go here. Here's the portrait that the Hovius family took. Many of these Dutch families would take like an official portrait before they left Holland and sort of left behind their old life. And here you see the whole Hovius family at that point. They still had a daughter, Frida, when they came to Canada. On the left, of course, you see Anna, the father. In the center at the back, you see Wilfred. And in the center-ish, in the middle, you actually see John, young John there, the very John we're speaking with right now. The next photo here shows the Oldwaning family, one of the two only photos I have so far of them on the ship. This is, I think, on Grote Bear, one of the converted troop carriers that the Dutch immigrants traveled to Canada on. And there you see the whole Oldwaning family, the 4 kids and the parents. This is a really great photo of the Drent family at their first home, which was near Ottawa. And you see Hendrik in the center there. And you can probably see that they've got these 2 older sons, Jacob and Chris and their daughter in the back, Geertje, and Geertje tragically died of a brain aneurysm a few years after this. So they've got their 3 older children, and then Janet and John, then 2, like a long gap, and then the 2 younger children, Janet and John, in the front there. That's the Drent family. Here you see, this is the Bramer family in front of the house that Jan Bramer with his son-in-law Dave de Vries built. This house was just about finished at the time of the accident. They were able to move in. While they were building it, the family lived in the garage, actually right nearby this house itself. So the garage, they made it into a fairly comfortable little home. And this is a photo of Dirk Reichson and his wife. Dirk is the only one who came to Canada without, they hadn't had their child yet, their son John. So they had in some ways, more of an adventure, where the other ones were, scrabbling to survive financially and find work and so forth. They kind of had almost like a honeymoon, doing tobacco harvesting, working together, picking strawberries together. They even built their own house together in Byron, and that house still stands today. That's them. And then finally, here's a photo of Wilfred at 19. He'd helped, I think, contributed or helped to buy this car that he really liked, and had traveled actually to Michigan before the accident. So this was his summer, the last summer of his life. So let's go back to some other questions from John. Actually, sorry, let me just check if there are any other questions. Do feel free to ask questions, otherwise we'll keep going. But as we go, you're welcome to post questions just in the chat, the chat, or as comments in the YouTube window. So yeah, John, maybe you can share a little bit about what your father was hoping for in Canada. What was he hoping to achieve by making this move?
My father was hoping to be self-employed on his own dairy farm. And that was the ultimate goal and his purpose for coming to Canada. And my mother wholeheartedly agreed with that program. And as a result of that, we actually came.
That's right. And you yourself were pretty connected with this. You've told me that you were the son. You had an older brother, but that in fact you were the son who would have kind of become the farmer along with your dad.
Yes, my older brother wanted to become a doctor, and that was his aim and goal when we left Holland. And he was not that interested in farming, as I was very interested in farming. I always followed my dad around. Whatever he did around the house, I would follow him and see what he was doing. I learned to milk cows when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I enjoyed cows. I like cows. I enjoyed being with them. Then when the accident happened, just before the accident, my dad and my brother gave all the money that he earned and what was put in the family pot to live on and to save some. And so was it from the work that Teresa and I did, and any money that came in as work, and I worked in tobacco in the summer, and that was put into the pot as well. My mother worked in tobacco as well on occasion, and on the day and time when the accident happened, she and I were actually working together on a farm, in a tobacco farm. So my father and mother had collected enough money to be able to make a agreement with friends of theirs that they would buy that farm, 100 acres, and it would be done actually shortly in the fall of that year, of the year they died. And it was, my dad said that I would be the person that would quit school at age 14, and I would be working the farm while Wilfred and my dad would continue working so that we could slowly build up equity in the farm and cattle, etc. And I was quite happy with that situation. I didn't like school at all, so that was a good solution for me.
So how did this tragedy then, change the course of your family's life and your life? Like, can you tell a little bit about the impact of the tragedy and it's how it affected your life?
Well, the family, of course, was affected because workman's compensation would only provide enough money that my dad had basically made, not anything that my brother had contributed. So as a result, the family received far less income on a monthly basis. As a matter of fact, the workman's comp was $25 for each child, but our family had too many children, so the last children were not getting the $25. So that really hurt our family. As for myself, I, of course, realized that I would never be able to farm so that dream quit. And I had to buckle down and do homework and schoolwork so that I could continue with an education. And I, of course, did that. And I ended up being a lawyer, so I was fortunate.
Right. Well, thank you. Now, we do have another question in the comments from my granddaughter, Aya. Thank you, Aya, for the question. Aya said to me, what makes you want to make this film? And I have to say a couple of things. The first thing is, when we found these documents and I realized that there was no museum, there was no book that had been written, there was nowhere to give these documents, because I felt like they don't just belong to our family, they really belong to everybody. And especially these families who lost their fathers and brother, they should at least know about this. So I can't bear to have this story just lost and this material just lost. That's the first part. The second part, of course, is meeting John and meeting all of the other families. At that point, I feel a strong obligation to just, while we cannot undo the tragedy, of course, we can undo that second injustice of letting the tragedy be forgotten. That is something we can change. And I think that's the reason that I want to and make this film, and the reason we are making this film. I think I want to talk a little bit about this issue of, this story has been lost. So everywhere we go, everyone we talk to, there is absolutely no one person who knows everything. Each person, each item we find is a little piece of discovery, and you slowly build the puzzle. And that's what we're doing. It's like detective work, slowly building and putting together this large puzzle. So I want to show some examples of that. For example, around the question of the site. So here's a drawing that we actually only recently got, thanks to Doug Goudreau, somebody who lives in the town of Dresden, has been incredibly good at finding and digging up lost documents. So just what we're looking at here is one page of the engineering plan. So these are the plans that my father's engineering company made for this project. On the left, you see like the large overview of the area, and then somewhere here you see this a picture of the actual pumping station. So there were three things that were being installed: a water treatment plant, a pumping station, and a filter house that was going to be expanded. These were the three elements of it. This tragedy occurred in the construction of the pumping station. So now we're going to go and see another drawing. This is my father's drawing showing and he made this after the accident, but he would have been working with these plans, and this is just one page of them. There's a lot more of that. But he showed where it was positioned slightly in from the river, because they knew that the soil wasn't, that it was not quite stable enough, so they moved it in and over compared to the original plan that they'd made. Now the question is, where is that today, right? Like, we know approximately, but where is it actually today? So now we can look at this Google map, and here's one of these. Every now and then you get a gift if you're doing this kind of detective work. Every now and then something good happens for the hours of looking and digging and so forth. In the Google map, you can see the outline of where Sydenham Street was going to be moved and the outline of Wood Street that was actually never built. Well, that is amazing. Clearly, Google still has the old town plans, which were never implemented. If you go back to my dad's image here, you see future road line of Sydenham Street, and you see Wood Street as it's written in there. So we can now take that, look at the Google map, and there I lined them up. So there I can plunk my dad's drawing and the angles of the streets right in, and that gives us this spot. So there's a detail rather, and now we can look at what that would look like. And here you can see the what, according to the drawing, my dad's second drawing, there is the location. Now, of course, that's one piece of evidence, and especially something this important, you never settle for one indicator. You want to be able to validate that. So now let's look at this image. This is a newspaper, a very striking newspaper image, by the way. This is on the second day when they're recovering bodies, and they're actually about to bring a body out in this image right here. If you look at the top, you see a very distinctive roof line of a particular house, a house which thankfully is still standing today. You can see these gables at the top of it. Now I'm going to look at this, and here is a photo my father took probably about a month after that, and there you can see the very same roof. So look at the roof line here at the top of the photo, and then look at the same roof line here in my father's photo. So now we can, and you can see that in the foreground of my father's photo is the spot where the cave, where they were building. And now here is two photos where I've taken, on the top is my father's photo, and then below that, and you can see Joe, my colleague and partner in crime in this film. You can see Joe standing there. But you can see the roof line today. And it's probably too difficult to see on the screen right now, but you can actually see that I am standing closer to the house than my father was, but lower than my father was. And that's quite obvious because there's been an immense amount of erosion on the riverbank. And by the way, there is no sign of this accident today. The riverbank doesn't show you at all where it was because all that soil has been washed away by numerous floods over time. So this is just one example of how you kind of go through the work of figuring out where's the location. That's just one piece of it. And here you can see the area today, the overhead. And we're actually going to do a scan. We're going to use a drone and make a 3D scan of the riverbank so that we can reconstruct and make basically a model of what it looks like today and then what it looked like then. And we'll use that model in the film to show the area the way it did look at the time, show where the cut was made, and kind of show the day-by-day progress of the construction and then the cave-in itself. So the large green circle is the area where we'll scan and create this model. On the bottom left, that circle is the water treatment plant, which the pumping station was going to feed. In the middle, you can see a circle that shows the house with that distinctive roof line that we saw in the photo. The next circle, second from the right, that's the house where the men ate their meals. So they slept in a hut, but they ate their meals during the week when they were working. They went home on weekends, but they ate meals. And that house belonged to the Christian Reformed Church. And the family that lived there, or the couple that lived there, they fed the men. And then finally, the little circle on the right is where the new pumping station. After the disaster, they used a completely different design and made the new pumping station. So that gives you kind of an overview of that part of it. Yeah, I think that we should check out. Let me check if there are other questions here. Okay, hang on, I got to check here. Okay, so first question from, I got two. I'll answer Francis first, sorry, in wrong order here. Francis asked if the pumping station was ever completed, and the answer is they gave up on the original design and location. So instead of digging a pit right beside the river, they did a different one where they basically like digging a tunnel straight down 35 feet deep. And then from there, another tunnel straight out about 140 feet to the river. So they put it quite a bit inland on the south side of Sydenham Street. And there's also a question from Tom, or Dutch, the podcast. Oh, Tom is asking, John, was the accident part of the motivation for you becoming a lawyer?
I would say that it was because I felt that there had been a great injustice done in that the whole accident seemed to be brushed aside and forgotten. And I felt that at the time, if that could happen, and if an accident like that could happen, something should be done about it. And the family should be helped. That was my motivation.
Yeah, this is, of course, really one of the things about this. It's, a story, as I've said, or an accident that shouldn't have happened. But also a really big part of this story is, how did this event disappear from public memory? And that is a question we may never fully answer, but there was clearly a real wish on the part of the authorities to keep this project on track. The water treatment plant was part of an enormous initiative in the province to build new waterworks for all the towns and cities in Ontario. In the 50s, the populations were growing and industry was growing, and the old aquifers, so well waters that the towns were using, couldn't remotely keep up with the demand. So there was an enormous initiative there, and I think part of this was, well, we got to keep this job going, and the town of Dresden also had to keep the job going. But still, there is something strange about it. And I think we learn that in particular if we compare it to something that happened 2.5 years later in Toronto, in Hoggs Hollow, which is where the York Mills subway station is on Yonge Street right now. There was a fire. They were building a huge underground water main in 1960. And there was a fire underground and 5 Italian workers were killed. That event led to the same things that happened in Dresden. There was a police investigation, there was an inquest, there was a trial, except in Hoggs Hollow, there were consequences every step of the way. And that led, within 1 month, a major royal commission was struck that spent about 6 months studying workplace safety all across Ontario, getting submissions from unions and every possible organization, collecting information and making recommendations. And those recommendations from Hoggs Hollow, the Royal Commission, those recommendations led ultimately to Ontario's modern workplace health and safety legislation. So Hoggs Hollow had a huge impact. Now, here's an interesting question. At something like that, you would expect that there would at least be a mention of Dresden. It's 2.5 years earlier. And you would think that the Ontario's biggest accident would at least merit a mention. I have not found a single reference, maybe one indirect reference, talking about the Trench Excavators Protection Act, the legislation that governed this type of work. There was a Trench Excavators Protection Act, and the Dresden excavation should have fallen under that. And if they had followed the rules of that act, they would have had an inspector. The inspector would have told them to put in reinforcements and shoring to protect the workers. If they had done soil testing like my father had asked, they would have known that the soil was incredibly unstable and not safe to work in the first place. Those things didn't happen. And yet this event within 2.5 years has somehow dissipated to the point it's not even mentioned during the Hoggs Hollow Royal Commission. So that is one of the elements of the story that we'll, of course, explore in the film. Just checking if there's any other questions here. Yep, thank you for those. John, anything you want to add before? I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of making the film and that. Anything else you'd like to add?
I really think, Eric, that you're doing a good job, and there's very little that I can add at this point.
Thank you.
except to say that I'm hoping that in the future we continue as we are today to make it very, very expensive for any company to break the laws in workman's safety. And if that continues, then I think a lot of the work has been done already. But I think that we can still make it so that there's no death or harm done at the workplaces if we enforce the rules and have them enforced. And as a result, I would ask that the province not keep reducing their resources to ensure that all of the rules are in place and are in fact being accepted by the employer.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. The rules, of course, on paper are significantly better today than they were in 1957. But are they actually always enforced? We still have in Ontario 30 to 40 deaths a year. So there are still people dying. And unfortunately, not only in Ontario, but in many other places, the deaths and issues are disproportionately affecting immigrant workers. And that's another theme in this story that is sadly still relevant today, that immigrant workers are more vulnerable. We saw it very recently in the United States. There was this collapse of the bridge in Baltimore. 6 workers are killed, and then again, once again, it's immigrants who are the victims. So that's an important theme of this story. And I think that, one of the things that history shows us is that when a story is told, it becomes a thing. Right now, this story has been neglected and allowed to disappear. By making a film, we make it a thing, and people know about it, and it becomes part of our mental landscape. And that's why this is so important. I want to talk a little bit about the process of making the film and maybe show you our budget, actually, because you might be wondering, like, all this crowdfunding, what is in fact the cost of the film? Where does the crowdfunding fit into this? So let's take a look at that. Now here you can see, and I'll spare you all the details. This is already oversimplified, but the first column on the left where you see the budget, at the bottom you see $516,000. That is our estimated or projected budget for this entire film. That includes the work involved in research and script writing and that stuff, the work involved in interviews, like filming everything. And then, of course, there's enormous work to be done in post-production, creating, the 3D animations of the site to explain, physically what's happening, the sound design, because, we're telling something about the past, so we have to sort of bring the past to life and so forth. And then, of course, there's quite a lot involved in legal and administrative fees, the process of marketing a film like this. So there's a lot involved. So that's about $500,000, and that's an estimate, our best guess right now. The second column in the middle is what's contributed, and that's basically my time and money and Joe's time and money, basically what we give. So in fact, that number is low right now. We're well over $120,000 in terms of out-of-pocket expenses and time spent on this project. And so then the last column shows the money we need. Now that shows the bigger chunk of money, but let's go to the next slide there, which, thank you. And that shows sort of the breakdown. So the blue is the producers, that's us, that's out of our pocket and our time. The red is private donation. We can't use the word donation because you don't get a tax receipt. But that's what the crowdfunding is for, and things like crowdfunding, individuals coming forward and helping us finance it. And then the blue, and then the green is where, sorry, I should be doing these. Sorry, thank you, Joe, for clicking for me. The green is what we hope to raise through traditional means, and that means like a broadcast pre-sale. So what we're going to do is take the crowdfunding money this summer and use that to complete filming in Canada. That's the first goal. And our goal is to reach $78,000, but we really want to get past that. So please keep spreading the word. We're really looking for, the number of contributors will help us hit our goal, and also looking for people, individuals who might be in a position to make a larger contribution, like $5,000 or $10,000. We've had a few of those already, and we need a few more of those because it will really make a difference. $78,000 allows us to finish filming, and everything we get beyond that allows us to get further down the road of post-production, the editing process. Once we've done that, I will start with Holland and try to get broadcast pre-sales there, because I think this is a film that will interest the Dutch audience at least as much as the Canadian audience. And frankly, I think it would interest anyone in the world, but let's start with the obvious places. And Holland is one of them. When we get that, that will also allow us to do filming in Holland, which is really important, like the places where the people in this film lived before. Perhaps some of their family who didn't come to Canada, about their memories of that time. And also talking to immigration experts, talking about why people left Holland and so forth. And then we come back to Canada and we do the same routine. We've already approached CBC and TVO, and unsurprisingly, it's a tough market. And we didn't get anything this year, and it doesn't surprise me, but we'll do the same thing next year. So really, building a film is as much making the film as it is the incredibly hard work of raising the money. And I think I really want to express my deep gratitude to everyone who's contributed and who wants to contribute to the crowdfunding. It is incredibly helpful, and it will allow us to make the most important next step in this project of finishing the filming. So there's the current status. So please, everybody on this call, spread the word. Keep talking to people who might be able to help us make this. And let's make sure together that this story is known and never again forgotten. I just want to check, are there any other questions? I don't think there's any other questions. So I think with that, John, is anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
The families got together, and they actually brought a stone on the site that they were told was the site of the accident. And on that stone are the names of the 6 people that died.
Yeah, thank you. That's important. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. There is a monument, and it's actually it's very close to the location. It's virtually in the right spot. So there is a monument there, but this is part of the stuff, back to the question of what motivates me to make this film. It doesn't feel right to me that the only people who've acknowledged this event are the people who suffered. I think the community, we, Ontario, we should acknowledge this event. We should tell those families that we know this happened and that we care that it happened. They shouldn't be the only ones carrying this. Again, that's why I think this film is so incredibly important. All right, I'm just going to check if there are... Oh, there's another question. And this is from... Oh, do I know how my father... This is from my granddaughter, Medina. Very good question. She asked, do I know how my father felt when nobody listened to his warnings about the danger of the site? I know because he told my mother. And he told her that their attitude was... I mean, this is his perspective. And by the way, when you get into a complicated story, there are other perspectives. His perspective was that the attitude was, don't worry, kid, we know what we're doing. And let's face it, my dad was a 25-year-old. The contractor was a very experienced and respected person in the community, right? So in a way, he felt like he wasn't taken seriously. And then when it happened, I think my father was really dismayed that there were no consequences. He'd taken all these photos, he'd arranged it, he brought that to the court, he testified at the trial of the contractor, and the contractor was acquitted. I think that really shocked my father. I think he really felt like... I think this really stayed with him and kind of haunted him. It was bad enough that it had happened, but in the fact that there weren't really consequences afterwards, it was as if, it didn't matter or something like that. So I think this really troubled my father. All right, I think that's it. John, do you want to say anything else before we close?
No, I said what I had to say, and thank you for
right.
allowing me to say it.
So then I want to say, first of all, thank you so much, John, for joining me. I also want to make a thank you to all of the families of these men who've been incredibly helpful and supportive of this project. And we are, making a film about the worst thing that happened in their lives. And they've been very, very supportive, kind, and engaged with this. So I'm really grateful. I don't feel alone at all in doing this. We've got this whole community with us doing it. I want to thank everybody who's contributed at the crowdfunding and everybody who will contribute still. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you so much. Happy Canada Day. We'll roll an outro here, just a little piece of a trailer again. But again, thank you so much. Happy Canada Day.
I think he tried to suppress the whole thing.
She never really got over that accident.
I could have been part of that team. Who knows what would have happened to me.
People just wanted to get on with life and didn't want to hear bad things in the 50s. And the fact that it conveniently happened to an immigrant group that didn't speak particularly good English made it easy to do so.